A common question asked of couples is, so, how did you meet? Back in my day, couples usually met through mutual friends or family, school or work, or activities. I met my husband at work. He was completing his medical residency in pediatrics, and I was working as a nurse at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, a real-life Grey's Anatomy kind of connection. We went out on our first date after working very hard to resuscitate a 3-year-old child. The child survived and thrived, and we've been happily married for 34 years and raised 8 amazing kids. But for most newly connected couples, their story of meeting is very different. For example, Whitney and Brock, Mariah and Cameron, and Sarah and Tyler, all happily married. How did they meet? They swiped right and connected on a dating app. Since the first online dating platform launched in 1995, relationship connections have been transformed. Most newly connected couples now meet through dating apps. Tinder, the largest dating app profile, currently has more than 75 million users worldwide. With the recent pandemic lockdowns, dating apps have grown and continue to grow. We look at those numbers and we think, wow, dating apps are wonderful. People really do find love. But what else may they find? In 2020, Ashlyn was sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed to death by Ethan Hunsaker at their first meeting. They met on Tinder. In 2018, Emily reported being raped at the first meeting by someone she'd met on a dating app. After reporting her assault, she continued to see his profile on other dating app platforms. In 2022, a university student reported being raped in her dorm room by a man she had met that day on a dating app. I not only see the dark side of dating apps, but I care for the survivors. You see, I'm a forensic nurse, a sexual assault nurse examiner. I'm also a researcher focused on sexual assault and violence against women. As I began to care for more and more patients who reported being raped at the initial in-person meeting by somebody they had met on a dating app, I began to wonder, what is happening? Are we seeing more rapes facilitated by dating apps? And are these rapes different than other rapes committed by acquaintances? In 2017, my research team and I began to collect data on what we termed dating app facilitated sexual assault, or DAPSA. We defined our criteria as the victim was 14 years of age or older. The victim reported meeting the perpetrator on a dating app and being raped at the first meeting. The victim had a sexual assault medical forensic examination with evidence collected. Before I dive into our findings, let's talk for a minute about what we know about dating apps. Several studies have shown that there's a fairly equal proportion of male and female users. Some dating apps are for cisgender and transgender or non-binary users, while some are specifically for LGBTQ+ individuals. We know that more than 50% of young adults in the US use dating apps. We also know that some dating apps are more appealing to users than others. Why do people use dating apps? Well, researchers have looked at this question too, and they found the number one reason is entertainment. It can be pretty entertaining to scroll through those profiles. A next top motivator is to forge new relationships, including finding love. Researchers have also found some gender differences, with women more likely to use dating apps for friendship and validation, and men more likely to use dating apps for excitement and casual sex. And now, researchers have also found that some dating app users possess more dark personality traits such as Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy than other dating app users. Collectively, I'd like us to take a deep breath before I share some very heavy and distressing information about rape and sexual assault. I can't sugarcoat this information because to do so would be an injustice to survivors, my patients. The information I share with you is real and raw, and it should make us uncomfortable as we consider what survivors of sexual assault experience. Our research question was, are there differences between dating app-facilitated sexual assaults and other acquaintance sexual assaults? Our answer was a resounding yes, with a multitude of concerning findings. First, let's talk numbers. Out of 1,968 acquaintance sexual assaults, that's more than 3 times the number of people in this auditorium. From 2017 to 2020 across Utah, we found 14%, 274 cases that met our DAPSA criteria of meeting on a dating app and being raped at the initial in-person meeting. We found more males in the DAPSA cases. Homosexual men may use dating apps more due to difficulties in openly forging romantic relationships, especially in conservative cultures. We found half of the DAPSA victims were college students. Of great concern, we found that 60% of the DAPSA victims reported mental illness, a huge vulnerability for sexual assault. We found that the DAPSA cases were much more violent cases, with one-third of victims being strangled. A very troubling finding, as strangulation indicates heightened lethality and potentially attempted murder. We found that the DAPSA victims suffered more assaultive acts with resulting more injuries. 71% had documented physical injuries, with 1/4 having breast injuries. Over 50% had documented anogenital injuries. We found that in DAPSA cases, victims were less likely to fight back against their attacker. In any rape, victims frequently experience a freezing response where it's difficult to move or sometimes even speak due to the fear and trauma from the sexual assault. This might be heightened in DAPSA victims. Victims have told me, I thought I was going to die, and I was so scared that I just laid there. With any research study, we have to look at the findings and say, so what? So what do we do with this information? And now what? We believe the answer to the first question, so what, is that our findings indicate that violent sexual predators use dating apps as hunting grounds for vulnerable victims. Consider a safari, a lion hunting gazelle. Who is the lion going to attack? The most vulnerable, the gazelle that is more easily separated from the group. In many ways, dating apps have created a new safari with vulnerable victims and lions hunting them. In dating apps, the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing is easy to accomplish. Users can make their profiles as appealing and potentially false as they desire. The most important question then becomes, now what? Do we simply tell dating app users, be careful, as there are wolves in sheep's clothing? Is that sufficient? No. That is the current approach, and it is failing. The problem with that approach is that it solely places the burden of preventing the sexual assault on the victim. If the victim does not follow written safety guidelines or does not perceive the wolf in sheep's clothing, they may then erroneously feel like they are to blame for the rape and not report. And if victims do not report, then the wolves keep attacking. What if instead dating apps adopted a systems-based approach where they worked to expose the wolves? They could conduct criminal background checks at no additional cost. They could beef up artificial intelligence to pick up on threats or unwanted messages or images. They could provide clear channels for victims to report and then share the information about violent predators across platforms. If we truly want safer dating apps, then we need to address and reduce sexual violence in our society. In the United States, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. Look around you. Consider the people you know, and then apply those numbers of 1 in 3 women and nearly 1 in 4 men, and consider the staggering numbers of people impacted by sexual violence and its shattering effects. And now, we must consider what we do as a society to end sexual violence. And the first step is to believe victims. The major rape myth out there is that there's a lot of false reporting in rape. This is simply not true. Multiple research studies have found that false reporting in rape is low, between 2 to 8%. That's the same as other crimes. We must believe victims. And now, the final question. What are you going to do with this information? In the spirit of TED, you have just heard information worth sharing. Who are you going to share this information with about dating apps, about sexual assault? Remember the smiling photos of couples who met on dating apps and the love and happiness they found. We want to preserve that, but dating apps must improve safety features to expose the wolves. We can reduce sexual violence, but it takes all of us standing together, uniting together, and declaring enough. We can end sexual violence. Join me in sharing this information to end sexual violence. Thank you.